The African American story in the United States is marked by repeated failed promises to right the wrongs of the past, both distant and recent, and failure to acknowledge and take responsibility for the structural racism that perpetuated these harms. This report, crafted by the task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans pursuant to its mandate under Assembly Bill 3121, seeks to change this story with incontrovertible evidence of the harms requiring reparations and meaningful recommendations designed to redress them. The historical information and recommendations in this report are supported by extensive research and analysis, expert witness testimony, and testimony from those who have lived through the horrors and pursued the solutions that are addressed in this report. Taken together with the substantive analysis regarding international standards, local, state, federal, and international examples of reparations, methods for educating the public regarding the critical issues addressed herein, and a catalogue of the racist laws and policies that cumulatively created this nation. This report is intended to satisfy the requirements of AB 3121 in an accessible and comprehensive manner that will facilitate progress towards, finally, enacting meaningful reparations for African Americans in California and the United States. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and in 1865 the states ratified the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which commanded that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. In supporting the passage of the 13th Amendment, its co-author Senator Lyman Trumbull of Illinois said that it is perhaps difficult to draw the precise line to say where freedom ceases and slavery begins. The United States then experienced a 12-year period after the Civil War called Reconstruction, during which the federal government tried, with some success, to give newly freed African Americans access to basic civil rights. As just one example of the many ways in which this period reflected an expansion of rights, by 1868 more than 700,000 African American men were registered to vote in the former Confederate states. These advancements came to an abrupt end after the presidential election of 1876, when federal political leaders reached a compromise which resulted in the withdrawal of federal troops from key locations in the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. Later, in 1883, the United States Supreme Court interpreted the 13th Amendment as empowering Congress to pass all laws necessary and proper for abolishing all badges and incidents of slavery in the United States. However, other than during the Reconstruction, instead of abiding by the Supreme Court's and the Constitution's mandates to abolish badges and incidents of slavery, the United States federal, state, and local governments, including California, perpetuated and created new iterations of these badges and incidents. The resulting harms have been innumerable and have snowballed over generations. In 2020, through the enactment of Assembly Bill No. 3121, California began the process of addressing its role in accommodating and facilitating slavery, perpetuating the vestiges of enslavement, propagating state-sanctioned discrimination, and tolerating persistent systemic structures of discrimination on living African Americans across its systems of government at the local and state level. AB 3121 acknowledges the harms caused by slavery and the lingering negative effects of the institution of slavery on descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, and more broadly, on living African Americans and on society in California and the United States. So thoroughly have the effects of slavery infected every aspect of American society over the last 400 years that as a result of this historic and continued discrimination, African Americans in California, especially those whose lineage can be traced to an enslaved person, continue to suffer economic, educational, and health hardships that have prevented them as a people from achieving equality. AB 3121 established the task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, and directed the task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans, taking into account the institution of slavery, including the federal and state governments that constitutionally and statutorily supported the institution of slavery, the legal and factual discrimination against freed slaves and their descendants from the end of the Civil War to the present, including economic, political, educational, and social discrimination. The lingering negative effects of the institution of slavery on living African Americans and on society in California and the United States. How instructional resources and technologies deny the inhumanity of slavery and the crime against humanity committed against people of African descent in California and the United States. The role of Northern complicity in the Southern-based institution of slavery, and the direct benefits to societal institutions, public and private, including higher education, corporate, religious, and associational. AB 3121 also required the task force to recommend appropriate ways to educate the California public of the task force's findings, recommend appropriate remedies in consideration of the task force's findings, and submit to the legislature a report of its work. This is the task force's final report, incorporating and updating the contents of an interim report issued in June 2022. Part 1 of this report summarizes the harms caused by slavery and the lingering negative effects of the institution of slavery on descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, and more broadly, on living African Americans and on society in California and the United States. So thoroughly have the effects of slavery infected every aspect of American society over the last 400 years that it is nearly impossible to identify every badge and incident of slavery, include every piece of evidence, and describe every harm done to African Americans, and particularly to freed slaves and their descendants. In order to address this practical reality, Chapters 1 through 13 describe a sample of government actions and the compounding harms that have resulted, organized into specific areas of systemic discrimination. In order to maintain slavery, government actors adopted white supremacist beliefs and passed laws to create a racial hierarchy and control enslaved and free African Americans. After the end of slavery, although the federal constitution recognized African Americans as citizens on paper, the government failed to give them the full rights of citizenship and failed to protect African Americans from widespread terror and violence. Along with a dereliction of its duty to protect its African American citizens, direct federal, state, and local government actions continued to enforce the racist lies created to justify slavery. These laws and government-supported cultural beliefs have since formed the foundation of innumerable modern laws, policies, and practices across the nation. Today, 160 years after the abolition of slavery, its badges and incidents remain embedded in the political, legal, health, financial, educational, cultural, environmental, social, and economic systems of the United States of America. Racist, casteist, untrue, and harmful stereotypes created to support slavery continue to physically and mentally harm African Americans today. Without a remedy specifically targeted to dismantle our country's racist foundations and heal the injuries inflicted by colonial and American governments, the badges and incidents of slavery will continue to harm African Americans in almost all aspects of American life. Part 2 of this report discusses international standards for remedying the wrongs and injuries discussed in Part 1. This well-established framework has guided the task force in the formulation of its recommendations so that they comport with the 5 elements of reparations as set by international standards: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and non-repetition. Part 2 also provides examples of prior international and domestic efforts to provide reparations for human rights violations such as apartheid, incarceration, and forced sterilization. In keeping with the legal framework for reparations, Part 3 discusses the required components of a formal apology and recommends how the state of California should offer a formal apology on behalf of the people of California for the perpetration of gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity against African enslaved people and their descendants. In parts 4 and 5, the task force recommends appropriate remedies in consideration of the task force's findings, including how any form of compensation to African Americans, with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, should be calculated. It also covers what form of compensation should be awarded, through what instrumentalities, and who should be eligible for such compensation. Additionally, it addresses whether any other forms of rehabilitation or restitution to African descendants are warranted, and what form and scope those measures should take. The latter includes recommendations that the legislature enact a range of policies needed to guarantee restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and non-repetition. Part 6 of the report contains a summary of the task force's findings and recommendations regarding implementation of the California Racial Justice Act, Assembly Bill number 2542, from the 2019 to 2020 regular session. And Part 7 summarizes findings from community engagement and community input regarding reparations and the work of the task force. Part 8 recommends appropriate ways to educate the California public about the task force's findings and of the legacy of enslavement and legal discrimination in California. Finally, Part 9 contains a compendium of California laws and policies that have had a significant impact in the development of the state and nation's unjust legal systems, including those that have subjugated and continue to disproportionately and negatively affect African Americans as a group and perpetuate the lingering material and psychosocial effects of slavery. Taken together, the components of this report are not only intended to satisfy the requirements the legislature set out in AB 3121, but also to serve as a blueprint for other states and eventually the federal government when they perform the critical task of atoning for this nation's victimization of African Americans, especially those who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. While California's first-in-the-nation effort is an important step, and the task force eagerly anticipates the legislature's enactment of the recommendations contained herein, this national shame can ultimately be comprehensively redressed only through national reparations. AB 3121 authorized the task force to hold public hearings to pursue its mission. In order to inform the contents of its report, the task force held 16 public meetings during which it considered public comments, expert and personal witness testimony, in addition to considering the voluminous materials submitted to the task force via email from those unable to attend the meetings. In total, the task force heard over 48 hours of testimony from 133 witnesses, as well as over 28 hours of public comment in the course of its meetings, and received approximately 4,000 emails and 150 phone calls. When discussing issues as complex as race and reparations, precision is paramount. Precision helps ensure that the writers and the reader begin in the same place to arrive at the same understanding. As described later in this report, words have been weaponized throughout American history to dehumanize African Americans. Words can also be used to mend, to acknowledge, to respect, and to uplift. To that end, this report defines and adopts the following terms throughout its pages. The N-word, the word nigger, has been used for centuries to dehumanize African Americans. The terms Negro and colored person, as opposed to person of color, although adopted by African American communities for periods of time, have since been recognized as derogatory terms. When quoting historical documents, this report will quote these words, not to condone the words or their vicious meanings, but to present them in the context in which these slurs were used. The California legislature enacted AB 3121, recognizing that the lasting wounds of enslavement and discrimination cannot begin to mend until those wounds are first addressed. In that same spirit, this report quotes these terms, recognizing that reparations or any other answer to racism cannot be complete until this report squarely faces the horrors of enslavement and the systemic discrimination that followed and persists today. White supremacy. White supremacy is a system of belief and power that white people are superior to other races. This report confronts the idea of white supremacy and the various forms that it takes. When discussing the concept of white supremacy, the report uses the term to refer to two concepts. First, this report uses the terms white supremacy or white supremacists to identify groups or individuals who believe that white people are superior to people of other races. When used this way, white supremacy describes individual prejudice. Examples of white supremacist groups, including groups that exist to this day, include, for example, the Ku Klux Klan. Second, this report uses the term white supremacy in the American context to describe the racist premise upon which social and legal rules and practices are formed with the intention of discriminating or enacting violence against African Americans, among other marginalized groups. This report also uses it to describe cultural images and stereotypes that reinforce prejudices against African Americans and others. When used this way, white supremacy describes forms of racism that extend beyond individuals or organizations, a form of racism often described as structural or systemic racism. As this report demonstrates, the fundamental political, social, and economic system of our country negatively impacts African Americans regardless of the intent of any one person to be racist. This report does not use the term white supremacy to describe white people as a group, white Americans or white Californians. Not all white people are white supremacists. Anyone, regardless of race, with or without intent, consciously or unconsciously, can engage in acts of white supremacy or be a part of a racist system. A racist system harms all who live in it, even those who may have historically reaped the benefits of the system. Throughout the report, we use words that center the people discussed. Rather than refer to slaves, this report refers to enslaved persons. Most historians now refer to enslaved persons instead of slaves because the term slave reduces the enslaved person to an object. Instead, historians use enslaved person to grant agency and recognition to the enslaved individual and to remind us about the violence and inhumanity of slavery. For similar reasons, this report refers to enslavers rather than owners or masters. The words master or owner suggest a false sense of natural authority and suggest that the enslaved person is less capable than the enslaver. It also hides the fact that these individuals actively chose to enslave other human beings who are, as they were then, entitled to the same human rights as themselves. Instead of fugitive, this report refers to freedom seekers when describing enslaved persons or other people seeking to escape enslavement and other forms of captivity. The term fugitive was commonly used with laws such as the Fugitive Slave Laws of 1793 and 1850 passed by Congress, which used the term to reinforce the system of enslavement and criminalize those who sought freedom from it. Rather than refer to felon or ex-offender, this report uses terms such as formerly incarcerated and returning citizen. Similarly, this report uses terms such as person in prison or incarcerated person rather than inmates. Like the term fugitive, the terms felon, ex-offender, and inmate have stigmatized people who are or have once been in jail or prison. By labeling people as nothing more than their criminal justice status, these words deny people their full personhood and reinforce a stigma that prevents people from fully participating in society. Instead of referring to people without homes as the homeless, this report uses terms such as unhoused people or people experiencing homelessness. This follows the practice of the Associated Press style guide, which recognized that the phrase "the homeless" dehumanizes people by collectively reducing them to a label based on housing status rather than their status as people. African American, the task force voted to generally use African American rather than Black or Black American when discussing racial classifications. This term includes the descendants of enslaved people who were abducted from their African homelands by force to be enslaved in North America. This report uses African American instead of Black to refer to such persons, unless Black is in a quotation or the source cited or data being relied upon in the text exclusively uses Black. Descendant, the task force voted that eligibility for monetary reparations should be limited to those who are able to establish that they are a lineal descendant of an African American chattel enslaved person or of a free African American person living in the United States prior to the end of the 19th century. When this report refers to descendants, it refers to that group of eligible people as defined by the task force in that vote. Though the report uses person-centered terms, the report may sometimes quote historical documents or statements that do not. This report presents these.